Hi everyone, I'm re-recording this from the presentation that I did as founder of CoEQ to the Data Science for Health Equity Network on the 30th of September. We realised we didn't record it, but I felt it was necessary to get it into a shareable format again. So today the presentation will be on using AI for community-led pandemic decision-making and to help solve long COVID. I'm Kat Fraser. I've been working at the cutting edge of emerging business and innovation problems with many of the global brands and corporate enterprises that you can see on the screen there. Most recently at Lloyds Banking Group in their data science and AI group team, working across sustainability, disability, inclusion. So I'll start today with my journey, which consists of being at the front line of the ongoing pandemic and all the health equity impacts that I'm seeing both for myself, for others, for organisations, and increasingly in policymaking, which is why we need to address the complexity. And I've done my best to try and consolidate all our learnings over the last 4 to 5 years and what we're still not maybe seeing, but what we know where we're heading, and also the action that we need to take today to really try and prevent a future catastrophe that a lot of us are feeling at the moment. The role of CoEQ as a startup and a call to action and collaboration for people in the network and to really help accelerate change, because we need as many healthy allies as possible. Long COVID is really at the core of vascular disease, which is impacting the energy systems, making presentations like this challenging sometimes, but also just working at the level that is going to be required of us. I'm also working at the WHN. The World Health Network is a science and citizen task force that was set up at the beginning of the pandemic. And I felt there was a need to translate a lot of the complex science, risks and solutions for business, partly after doing that with my own organisation and seeing the opportunity to mobilise business as a force for good. Do check out the boardroom briefings at whn.global. I thought I'd start with just putting emotional lens on this for people who may have had a recent COVID infection and not thought anything about it. But when you feel that you've recovered and then actually 2 months later, you start feeling really ill and flu-y all over again. But this time you feel like your cells are actually poisoned. And you start becoming less and less functional as a human being as cognitive ability and energy decreases, which makes it really hard to continue working at the level that you previously were accustomed to. So this was my experience in 2020 after a COVID infection. This is just mine, but it represents a large proportion of the community of long COVID now that are not recovering. But if you're like me and you are interested in data, I decided to take all my health interaction data over the course of 2020 to explore a health customer journey, particularly with having corporate health insurance. I had access to lots of different specialists, and yet I spent a quarter of my working life trying to find healthcare that today still doesn't exist. The costs were rapidly increasing. And just to paint a picture of where we are in the UK versus the US, we're experimenting with 5% of what is currently being offered in the US at the moment with long COVID patients. So this is still very small in comparison to what I know many of the peers in the US are spending. But I spent 3.5 thousand of my own money, and Bupa spent the rest in order to find and have consultations across 9 different therapy areas and all of those were trying to piece together this emerging pattern that I was tracking through the Zoe app at the time, that I had daily severe symptoms of around 20 to 30, and these kept increasing over time. I kept finding that I was adding more and more symptoms into the app that Zoe wasn't tracking. So it painted a really complex picture of a sort of post-viral reaction to COVID that we now know as long COVID. And the data visualizations that I created to try and make sense of it all can be seen at thisiswellless.com, where I was also exploring this need for another type of language that wasn't just focused on wellness, because I certainly wasn't feeling like I could go and exercise, or that my mental health was going to have any impact on these biological symptoms that I was experiencing. And then gradually, as the years went on and I got another COVID infection and I became more immersed in the community through social media, and I discovered a whole world of people who were collaborating online, sharing the reality of their lived experience. We were also seeing daily, initially, in the press, before there was almost a sort of a blackout from talking about COVID. But now we've moved from not talking about COVID to placing the blame on people who aren't recovering, and all these headlines, not particularly nice to see constantly coming out of the media when you're so sick and you don't have any healthcare that is available to be able to tackle this complexity. Create a sort of them and us culture between people who can't recover from long COVID versus those who supposedly can, but we will see later that might just be an illusion. And the reality is much more serious. COVID is a vascular disease. It's definitely being transported, the virus SARS-CoV-2, around the body on this superhighway of blood vessels, which means it can turn up in any place in the body, particularly if you've got some vulnerability already. We know that every COVID infection is causing brain damage, reducing brain cells, and we've seen the continuous similarities and synergy between what people with ME had prior to the pandemic, many of whom are still bedbound with this disease. 25% of the ME population are severely impacted, and it's been interesting watching a sort of younger generation try and find new language around it, which is where bed rotting has become a TikTok trend, with teenagers trying to explain that they're not just having fun duvet days anymore. They literally can't get out of bed and they can't function. So we really need to pay attention to the lived experience to understand what's happening, because we are not serving this population at all at the moment with our long COVID clinics. People are unsafe in healthcare because we've dropped all the masking. The level of medical gaslighting because of doctors not knowing how to help has really just become the average, almost the expected experience, which should not be the case. And we're seeing an increase from the ONS results of people who have long COVID, aren't recovering, and now it's affecting them on a daily basis. Globally, the last estimate stood at 400 million of long COVID, but really that's just people who know that they have a damage from this virus. What we're not seeing is what's happening underneath, and this is what's really driven me for the last couple of years, this particular image. Having been someone who is working on climate change and understanding finance, climate systems, I strongly feel that COVID is causing climate change to the human body. So we really need to start looking at why this is happening. But healthcare professionals who are currently not being educated on this emerging science, bioscience, is a serious problem because they weren't taught it at medical school. Unfortunately, there's a default to being really protective around what they were taught and not learning or listening to patients or emerging researchers in this space. On autopsy, this virus was found in 84 different places in the body, live virus, a year at least after infection back in 2022, whilst people still had vaccines. So the research has just been getting worse and worse. We know that when you put long COVID patients into private labs in the US and they have inflammation scanning, you see a body literally on fire and a brain. But yet what we don't have at the moment is blood tests that even show that there's a problem. Standard blood tests for most long COVID people will not show that there's an entire problem in the body, which should signal alarm bells, because we are not creating a research health system at the moment to be able to see any of this. And our immune systems were definitely not designed for multiple hits of this virus, which is an airborne SARS virus, at least once a year now. In the last year, long COVID has doubled in children, and this repeated infections model should worry every economist and policymaker. In December last year, there was a Canadian research paper that looked at the population level of long COVID, and they discovered that after 3 infections, which could be known or unknown because of the asymptomatic features of the virus, 38% had or have had long COVID. And we're just following this almost blindly at the moment, and we've had 2 pretty big COVID waves since then, so we could be more like at the 50%, which is clearly not good, and we don't know what the future holds. This level of reinfections of an airborne SARS virus has never been studied before, but this is where we're heading. And then just as a really quick summary, the cumulative risk from every infection is increasing the risk of getting long COVID. There is definitely silent damage happening in the body. We know that in the global south, there's a lot of long COVID that's wrongly being diagnosed as TB. We know that in the north, the equity disparities are already playing a part in recording more cases by GPs in the north versus the south. And we know that although we currently have this reliance on vaccines, they're not enough. They're not designed to stop infections, which means they will not stop long COVID. So we urgently need to clean indoor air. And I highly recommend this paper that I've highlighted underneath, the Nature paper by Professor Zayed Ali, that goes into a very big picture view of the global long COVID science, research and policy landscape as it is today. Brings us to this current challenge that we face with a lot of different systems that we're dealing with today, but our health systems are not designed for this level of complexity of health, and we know that standard tests can't see what this virus is doing. So we're just missing continuously all these complex unmet needs of people who are out of the healthcare system and don't even feature on the current NHS backlog. But if we get this right, and if we include this as the future of health, which if COVID is now a pre-existing condition for all of us, we absolutely need to see this as the future of health. And we need a new field of medicine to be able to tackle it. So this means moving to a wellbeing economy, which will ultimately unlock trillions. What it doesn't mean is leaving people with lived experience out of the decisions that are going to impact them, which we're still seeing, unfortunately. It also means rapidly accelerating the level of funding that is allocated to complex chronic infection-associated diseases. The level of ME funding has been pitiful for the last 2 decades because psychiatry has been dominating the field. And there's also the gender health gap playing a part in the fact that 75% of ME has been predominantly women. And we're seeing similar pictures in long COVID, but definitely a lot more men. Now also having a slightly different long COVID experience to women. Women are more likely to have more of the autoimmune reactions, whereas men may be at risk more of cardiac events from this virus. So infection-associated chronic conditions, what does it mean? It means it sits across everything. The entire model of healthcare in its specialist silos now needs to, and every consultant needs to understand this and how it plays a part in their specialism. But we're also going to need to build the future on top of it. And I just want to say a massive shout out to David Petrino, who's a kind of rock star in our long COVID communities. He runs the Mount Sinai rehabilitation clinic, and he's just set up a core complex infection associated lab in New York with Amy Perel from Polybio. And the duo are absolutely trying to take this very complex picture and build and accelerate treatment programs and protocols around it. But this, I think, is really the key picture that everyone needs to understand, is that in healthcare we talk about having multiple comorbidities and complex illnesses in the traditional sense. And yes, that is happening. But on top of that, we're also getting system dysfunction and collapse in severe cases. And so you're not just getting one or two of these problems, these major multi-organ, multi-system problems. You're getting a lot of them, even all of them, all at once. And they all just keep adding and creating a bigger mass of inflammation in the body, which makes it harder and harder to recover from any of it. So we've got a huge job again ahead of us, and models and priorities will absolutely have to shift, because those who are not recovering aren't just concerned about getting reinfected, which should be a concern for all of us, but I've constantly been experiencing this on and off. It's not a continuous thing for me, thankfully, but for many people it is. Having little to no cellular function and still not being considered, that we can't even advocate for ourselves, because in some cases people can't talk, they can't walk, they can't eat, and when they do, it's using up energy in a sort of overdraft that they potentially will pay for later. And this continuous vicious cycle of post-exertional malaise, which is such a big feature of ME and long COVID, means that continuous activities and even working becomes a risk to health. So the opportunity again is that we need a different approach to community-led into pandemic decision-making. We've seen in the COVID inquiry that there's a emphasis on eminent professors and advisors who actually don't understand the science, the biomedical science, and have lacked the ability to even call this an airborne pandemic. I think it's clear that we can't continue living in this COVID forever world, and that we must clean the indoor air and add air filtration and ventilation to make it safer for everyone. From a healthy perspective, we can't just keep pouring money into short-term digital mental health tools. Positive thinking and the symptom management that we used to offer, and it's just causing presenteeism in people who are really too sick to work or be in their lives, unfortunately. It's not going to grow the economy, it's going to backfire. So we absolutely need a new model. We need a sort of Operation Warp Speed into biomedical treatment, and we need better leadership. We need to have long view leadership, which I applaud the Elders Foundation for really pushing this in all sorts of global problems at the moment. To be sustainable, we are going to have to become more inclusive in policymaking, change and innovation, and that's really the purpose of CoEQ. So what is CoEQ? So we're building a safer, fairer advocacy, change and innovation platform that will enable society, health and business to embed lived experience and expertise from community at speed and scale, using AI as a tool to support the most energy impaired to be involved in advocacy in a way that's psychologically safe by being anonymous and supporting no meetings, workshops facilitated by AI to enable communities that should really be at the table but can't be in the physical room with policymakers across these different areas. I've self-funded recently a prototype of how we are turning community insights and expertise into ready design problems, soon to be labs, and taking the concept of on-demand lived experience and expertise into a innovation roadmap that includes having impact data tools and reports that policymakers can build out of the community responses and start seeing this collective intelligence of communities that are currently sharing all their thoughts and expertise and unpaid knowledge work on places like Twitter, X, and Blue Sky. But this is really giving a place where they can visually see their impact and they can be a part of the design, the discovery and the design process end to end. So for the network, for the Data Science for Health Equity Network, I'd love to talk to anyone who is interested in collaborating on mapping this entire ecosystem. I'm sure it brings up a lot of big questions that you might have for our communities based on what you've heard today. And this is the overall approach of a tool that I want to build, which looks at taking questions that are asked to the community and starting to categorize responses and all the social data and intelligence that comes out of it by the types of mindsets, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, innovation categories, whatever's relevant basically to the policymakers who are using the platform. And we want to be able to show the quick wins, not just the problems, but also the solutions that we have as a community been collaborating around, having had so much access to these emerging researchers who have essentially been working in real time with us, getting feedback continuously and feeding that back into their work. And this enables us to let the researchers get on with the research and for us to be an advocacy machine, if you like, for really trying to change a few systems that we're going to need as an entire population. So this is just an example of some of the things I'm thinking around: mapping the open data system, having access to all of those unmet needs and ideas. How would you use that? What value is there in mapping individual lived experiences with summaries provided by AI to geomaps, so you can start seeing a place and local, regional, national set of information. You can bring case reports to life. Ultimately, how can we design dashboards that are not just useful for the policymakers, but also feed into help businesses maybe have those conversations with their employees? So lots to think about. I'm also creating a blog on this. Please do add your responses. And if you have any questions at all, please do reach out. I'm at kat@coeq.app. And we are at co-EQ Global currently on Twitter X. We're building a profile on Blue Sky. You can find our LinkedIn page. Please do let me know what other opportunities you can see for us and where you think this plays in your work. I look forward to collaborating with you. Thank you very much.